Hi, y'all. We're excited to have you here.
Chopping up.
Oh, no. Is it happening again? Are we good?
Just want to make sure, was that?
Oh, weird. Alyssa, you might have to take this one to my internet.
There we go. It looks like we're recording. It looks like Yep, our data science event. Looks like Corey's internet is a little fuzzy, so I'm going to take over. My name is Alyssa. I'm in admissions, so I am here really to be a fly on the wall and answer any specific questions in terms of our program for data science or any questions in regards to that. I'm going to hand it over to JP and he's going to do his thing. Again, if anybody's got questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat either for me or for JP as he's giving his presentation. The session is going to be recorded and sent out to everybody. It sounds like Corey said by Monday. So if you miss anything, you know, we can definitely send that recording out to you so you can play it back and get some more info that way. But JP, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. Hi, folks. Welcome. So we've got this presentation prepared for you today. You know, it's titled Data Science and the Dark Side of Data. You know, this is online for our May the 4th event. If folks might not be familiar, May the 4th has become this sort of like Star Wars celebration day, you know, after the famous line, "May the Force be with you, May the 4th," so on. So that helps us sort of corner in this theme for today, which is the dark side of data. Now, quickly, like, how do I say this? Before I go into or dive into the material for today, this is really just kind of like a broad overview of, you know, ethical issues and implications of misuse of data that we have experienced. I'm sure the things that I'll cover today, lots of folks have heard of in news and media, and I'll go into that. Yeah, and then we can have a nice little discussion at the end about how we feel about the discussion, the material today, and also how you feel about your data. I mean, this is really what it's about, right? Okay, so let's get going here. Whoops. Oh, my arrows aren't working. I guess I gotta click. Okay, so let's understand the problem, or really just kind of give you this overview about what we're gonna go through today. So I'll talk a little bit about my background and then get into what data is and what it is not. That's kind of like a subtle thing, a subtle concept that I at least like to always sort of drive home, at least when I teach. I'll talk about my background in a second. And also the importance of data in today's landscape and in general. Okay, and then we'll also discover or go through the data landscape. So we'll talk about the dark side of data, you know, the issues that have arisen with its use and misuse, talk about some case studies, mitigation laws and measures. And then, of course, at the end, we'll do a recap and call to actions, future of data discussion. All right, so first about me, great picture of me again here. I'm a senior data science instructor here at Flatiron School. I have a research background in astronomy and physics and education. So I've taught and for the last 6 years or so have been teaching, but also involved in research in astronomy. So maybe if anybody has some interesting questions about that, I'm happy to answer later. I'm more of a stars/planet person. If anybody has some astro interest out there, definitely in line, I guess, with Star Wars to some extent. And then my general interests, as far as data science concerned, are I'm interested in product. So this is kind of all of the wisdom, the machine learning techniques, the statistics that go into thinking about what makes a good product, whether that's a good or service. So this will often involve concepts like design, how to run experiments and use machine learning in those experiments to discover what makes products better. Also AI, of course. This is really what machine learning is. AI is this umbrella term, which machine learning is within. And then definitely also love to dive into philosophy, science, and comedy. All right, so according to Merriam-Webster, data is factual information, such as measurements or statistics, used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. Now, I want to sort of perhaps focus the attention a little bit more on the discussion aspect, the discussion part of this definition. I'll do this by sort of centering a quote by Mark Twain or Disraeli. I mean, Mark Twain popularized it. He attributed it to Disraeli. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics. Now, this is already sounding a little grim, but the whole point of me sort of foregrounding this discussion with data is that it all is on a basis of statistics. And statistics are measurements that one may, report in a way, in an aggregation in some way that can kind of give, if one's not careful, a skewed understanding or a skewed sort of, how do I say, a skewed picture of what some truth may be, some objective truth may be. So this is really to, again, foreground this discussion that data is an imperfect tool. And it's important that we realize this. Now, this is an incredibly philosophical concept or conversation, when it really depends on the context in which you're using the data. Sometimes data can be very accurate. This accuracy question is also a philosophical one. If you have a small sample of some information and you derive some insights for it, there's less accuracy, so to speak, than if you have a lot more of that data. And this is going into the math and the sort of quantitative nature of these things. But it's an important thing to understand because it can easily be at the foot of misuse and misunderstanding. Okay, so what data is not? This is a famous picture by surrealist painter René Magritte. It's called, and pardon my French here, I guess, Le Trésor des Images. I forget how to do that, but that's my best. And this was kind of like a real big art piece in, I believe it was around the 1940s. Painted it in response to some philosophies that were out at the time, Michael Foucault. Anyway, there's a lot of history here, but the idea that images, and I know it's not quite data, but images aren't, they're a representation of some objective, some truth, some idea, some concept, but that it's just that, it's a representation. It cannot be physically that thing. You couldn't fill this pipe because it's in a picture. Now, the whole point of me bringing this into the discussion is that it is related to the way in which data is very similar. Now, an image is data, but even just in the case of like what you would think of like some, flat file, like a CSV or an Excel sheet or a Google sheet, excuse me, allergies, folks, I apologize. It's an imperfect representation of something that's being measured. Now, measurement is something that is a field. Let's think about, well, with my training in science, measurement is very imperfect. I mean, you're going to get some errors in your measurements by virtue of a bunch of things. Some of these errors may come due to what's called systematics, or errors that happen just in the natural variability of the context that you're measuring, or the instrumentation. Like if you're using some sort of, how do I say this, some sort of sensor to sense something, there's going to be some natural variation because the sensor is subject to variations in the physical environment or something like that, right? Now, the latter, the variation in the context, for example, think about if you're dealing with a sample of heights of people, right? And this is, and you try to get some statistics from it, like the average height over this group. what the, and this is getting a little bit more statistical here, but standard deviations and things like that, you get some representation of the distribution of the data. And the thing here is that in statistics, we're usually quantifying averages or sort of central tendency or general behaviors. Now, depending on the context of the problem, the approach that one takes towards coming up with a solution needs to be really carefully thought about, because there are groups that may not be included in that average. And whatever, whatever solutions one employs, if not thought about very carefully, can obscure or exclude or, obfuscate truth, right? And so we have to be very careful about how we approach solutions and this kind of statistical information. All right, so that withstanding about what data is not, of course, it's really important, right? I mean, it guides decision making for companies. They extract insight from information that allows them to make prescriptions about how to captain a business in a particular direction, how to increase profit, or in the policy sense, how to apply the best measure of public health policy or something like that. So it allows us to, progressively get closer to fixing a certain problem. And again, it needs a very careful thought and direction. It also allows us to make predictions and identify trends that are not immediately apparent. This is important. Like I said, it helps steer businesses. And again, another very powerful suit of data and analysis and this kind of thing is that, you can use, for example, machine learning algorithms to sense relationships that are not immediately available. Now, if you think about a very simple plot, like a line graph, it's got a line on it, and you might say that the behavior is generally changing across time, if that's what you're measuring. That is a very sort of like, foreground approach, but there are algorithms that can go deeper into the data and extract deeper relationships, deeper meanings. So that makes it indeed powerful. Another reason why it's great or useful is really after this concept in the data profession is what gets measured gets managed. Now, this is, if you're interested in data analytics, data science, this industry, you might run into this quote every now and then. It's true. I mean, in order to solve a problem, you need information on it. And so that measurement is important. Again, keeping in mind that measurement is liable to variability, to errors, and this kind of thing. And of course, in general, data can promote transparency and accountability. So if you're reporting on metrics, and you have, cogent transparency efforts in place, there will be accountability or, security measures in place. So let's talk about the data landscape in this sort of dark side context. Let me take a look at the chat here, just make sure. Okay, great. Sorry, just wanted to double check on the chat. Let me take a sip of water here. All right. So let's talk about this landscape here. So we have really two dimensions of this data landscape. We have the way that people think about it, or this is based on like KPGM survey. This is a famous survey about consumers and business leaders and their takes on data. And this will kind of give you some sense about how people in industry and let's say users or consumers feel generally about this kind of thing. So you've got here that 70% say their company increased collection of consumer personal data over the last year. So no surprise, this is only, any data profession, the data context is always increasing. Some of you might have heard, data is quickly becoming or is already more valuable than oil. Make of that what you will. 62% say their organization should be doing more to strengthen data protection measures. 62%, more than half. This is giving us some idea that even business leaders are in the know, or at least, of course, open to the fact that this is something that requires attention and investment. 33% say consumers should be concerned about how their personal data is used by their company. So this is giving you an idea of how many of them are reporting that their consumers or the users that they work with have to be concerned about these data measures. And then 29% say their company employs unethical data collection methods. Now, this is really interesting. I mean, we have some reporting here. I mean, this is from a survey. We'll get to what the sample was and this kind of stuff soon. But that there are people even cognizant within organizations that there are methods or standards or measures that are unethical or liable to some sort of attack. Now, whether that's a statement about nefariousness, nobody knows. It's just a comment to say that there are security issues with data, as we can all imagine. All right. On the population side, we have 86% say, now this is of consumers, data privacy is a growing concern. So no secret there. Lots of folks have issues, or not issues, let's just say are concerned with how their data is being used. 68% are concerned about the level of data being collected by businesses. Again, more to the point that the population is ever increasing in concern about these kinds of things. 40% don't trust companies to use their data ethically. Now that's less than half, but that's still a big number. And this is a survey from 2021. Who knows what it is now? And then 30% aren't willing to share their personal data for any reason. So this is to say that both on the consumer and also business side, people are very much aware that there are issues with data management, data use, and misuse. All right, so again, I was talking earlier about damn lies and statistics from the Mark Twain quote. Now, whenever you see numbers and figures of that effect, you have to kind of, the sort of due diligence, so to say, is that you should be, this is also a personal virtue of mine, is leave no assumption unexamined. It's not to say that you think that there's always a nefarious motive, but it's always in the best interest to maintain a skeptical stance. Very much from my scientific training, but also just generally, it's just the better position to work from. Now, the methodology here says the findings in this report are based on online survey among nationally representative audience of 2,000 US adults, ages 18 plus, including a natural fallout of 974 US-based workers, so on and so forth, fielded from April 30th to May 6th in 2021. Now, take that as you will. This survey was conducted over what seems like almost a week period of a week in 2021. What might have happened around that time that could make it have an effect on survey responses. It also says the margin of error at the 95% confidence level is plus or minus 2.9 percentage points. Basically, to shift from the statistical speak, all that's saying is that these numbers are, if you were to take a random sample of a population like this, you could expect to get this number on average 95% of the time. In other words, 5% of the time you'd be wrong. There'd be some skewed statistics that aren't as truthful. Now that's a long way to say, but a long way to go through the fact that statistics need explanation. They need a certain literacy to understand. And hopefully, as these data fields grow and people become more interested in this stuff, we will increase also data literacy, which I think is very important. But in any case, the moral of the story here is, and the reason I put this methodology slide here is always keep in mind where your information is coming from, what the context of that information was, and so on. It's just always ask questions, be curious, always have a skeptical stance. Don't assume nefarious actors necessarily, but always assume the skeptical stance. Business leaders, the findings are from 250 director level decision makers in security, privacy, and data decisions at companies with 1,000+ employees. What might that mean? 1,000+ employees generally means that a company is in its sort of maturity. They've gone through a lot of the sort of growing pains of establishing the rules, the measures, and how do I say, regulations that they have in place to do things ethically and at least, I mean, not necessarily ethically, but I mean, they have infrastructure there that can easily lead them to have these conversations in a little bit more of a informed way. And again, we have this conference level description here, which, you know, is a little bit higher actually. It says ±6 percentage points, a little bit higher. There's a lot more error here. That could be due to a number of factors, but important to keep in mind, just with the numbers. Okay, let me just double check on the chat here. Audio slides are great. JP, what does natural fallout mean? So natural fallout here, I would imagine means folks, now consider the time here. This is April 30th to 2021. Natural fallout, great question. I'm not super sure, but I would imagine it could be one of two things. One, maybe something having to do with job loss and the pandemic, or folks that might have experienced some sort of how do I say, data breach or event. I'm actually not super sure. I would have to go into the study a little bit more. I'm not sure if this study was done particularly because, or in the context of a data breach, which is going to be a part of our discussion today. Good question. Let me see what else there's. It's very good. Okay, great. All right, so let's keep on going here. Right. So all of this discussion brings into mind this idea of surveillance and privacy. So we're going to go through some implications of issues with this and examples. Whoops. Let me just define this really quick for folks. Surveillance can mean close observation of a suspected person or context, and or the continuous process of collection, analysis, interpretation, and dissemination of data to policymakers. Now, this second part here is, you know, with particular reference to something I'm going to talk about now, which is in the case of this COVID-19 tracker. Now, you know, there's this, you know, terrible event that happened globally in, you know, about 4 years ago at this point. And at least here in the US, as far as I know, there was this surveillance effort. Now, surveillance, the word is kind of scary. Oftentimes it I think emotionally would trigger folks to be a little bit uneasy, but this is just to highlight that in this case, and this is not saying that there may have not have been issues with the approach, that it can be, let's say, on balance or in general, I mean, I don't want to say on balance, but used for a purpose which is intention is positive. This COVID-19 tracker was, you know, there was this thing with contact tracing, people who would respond having, how do I say, having tested positive for COVID-19 were tracked, and also who they, through their cell phone records, I believe, or their cell phone information, who they were around. And this was a method to get some idea of this information could have been a little bit, auxiliary or helping to understand the kind of transmission rate. Now, that was, excuse me, so sorry, excuse me, allergies is killing me, sorry. This is arguably a positive effect. It would help us understand and draw policy. Now, that there are other conversations that are roped in here with how policymakers decided to respond to this information, but this kind of surveillance on the face is positive, I would imagine, or it can be helpful. But surveillance can quickly become privacy invasion. And of course, this would happen when ethical standards are violated, authorities are not transparent on their use of the data, and security measures are not in place or insufficient. And so they're violated by nefarious actors. Oops, oh my gosh, let's click wheel. Excuse me, folks. All right. So when we have this sort of issue with privacy invasion, one of the sort of arenas in which these discussions happen is the arena of cyber attacks and data breaches. And this is when criminals gain unauthorized access to sensitive information. Some of the most common data breach arenas are spyware, phishing, and misconfigured access controls. Now, spyware are sort of malicious programs that can be piggybacked on downloadable content on the web, and when it gets to your computer, it can infiltrate and access information, confidential information, personal information. Phishing is when, for example, like in an email, sometimes you will get a strange email that has attachments on it, and this is quite a manipulative one because it expressly relies on sort of an emotional, social manipulation. The language of the email, the context of the email or website can make you feel like you're insecure, and so through that kind of fear, one can quickly volunteer some sort of access or information. And then there's misconfigured access controls. And all of these, of course, are in the domain of cybersecurity professionals. Misconfigured access controls are usually, data breaches with this typically happen with issues this is in the context of operating systems. So on your computer, there's sort of background coding or programming that's running, and coding is, if you kind of think of this engineering analogy and you're building a house, but that house is made out of code, there may be some bricks that are a little bit cracked and don't provide a sort of stable foundation. And there are ways that those kinds of inconsistencies can be taken advantage of. All right, whoops. So these are a little bit more, specific kinds of cyber attacks are exploits. So these take advantage of software vulnerabilities. So this was kind of like what I was just talking about. SQL injections. This is a kind of exploit in a website's database. So every website is, in effect, in the background, has some database attached to it. And folks can go in and manipulate the architecture of a website to grant them access into a website's database and avail themselves of personal information or confidential information. And again, phishing is websites or emails get us to share personal information, often using some sort of social engineering. And again, that's sort of creating a sense of insecurity and putting somebody in some sort of like, compromised emotional state so that they can easily sort of pick up some information from them. All right. So this data breach thing, it happens fairly often. These are just some of the data breaches that have happened over the last 10 years or so. We have and this is by no means an exhaustive list. There's probably, I would say 30, just about around, maybe, who knows, maybe that number is, I don't know where the number is, but that was my last check of all these sort of like million account compromise plus. So we have things like Yahoo in 2013, 3 billion accounts, Adar in 2018, 1 billion account, Alibaba, LinkedIn, 700 million, Alibaba was 1.1 billion accounts. Facebook, Marriott International, MySpace, even MySpace goes all the way back to the almost analog days, I guess, with 360 million accounts. So this is obviously a problem. It is something that, as professionals in both the data industry and the cybersecurity industry, people are working hard to keep up with. But it is that. I mean, it is a race, effectively. All right. So one of the sort of biggest, how do I say, examples of this data misuse is the Facebook Cambridge Analytica breach that happened in, well, it was firstly reported on in 2015. And then sort of everything that ensued with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica being investigated sort of happened up until 2018. So the context here, the firm obtained info on 87 million users who took a personality quiz. After this personality quiz, it created psychological profiles, which were then used to target political advertising. And so it was alleged that this information helped sway the result of the 2016 US 2016 election. So in response to this backlash, Facebook implemented new policies to restrict the access, sorry, there's something weird with that text there, to restrict the access of third-party apps to user data and face significant fines. This is, arguably one of the most, how do I say, largest in the news cycle. Even discussions about data integrity are still happening, particularly, in the context of how any of these issues can contribute to some sort of political engineering, and we should be concerned. Okay, so the implications for this were, of course, a loss of trust. The problem with this as a society, of course, is that we have this ever-increasing chasm between users of these tools and of these platforms and the institutions that create them, that maintain them, and so on and so forth. And so that's a big one. I mean, if anybody is sort of attuned to just politics in the US right now, loss of trust of institutions is a big one. And what we need in that respect is a lot more transparency and regulation and accountability, frankly, for companies that are at the foot of this. Of course, there's data privacy concerns, issues with political influence, and then legal and regulatory issues. So we need a greater transparency and accountability, and for sparking and also to spark a broader conversation in the role of social media in society. Now, all of these things are, of course, I was talking about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, but even in general, questions of social media and that kind of broad scale data repository can be it's a glaring security issue, right? So the more data, as I mentioned in the very beginning of the presentation, if you have a larger sample of information, it's more accurate in general about painting a picture about what's going on. So these large data repositories of these companies pose even larger security risks. So they need some regulation. Now, what does that mean on our end? And this is something that I'm hopefully always trying to evangelize for, is this need for professionals in the space to develop practices and ensure that security. And of course, this is going to involve cybersecurity professionals. It's going to involve data analytics and data science professionals, but certainly also policymakers and anyone. One of the biggest, and I think personally, things that we can, how do I say? One of the concepts that we can really invest in order to make this a more, how do I say, hygienic space in this respect is data literacy. I feel like also in my career as an educator, the more that you teach somebody about these tools on how to understand data and how to interpret it, and how to think about it, not just in the context of the actual measurement that it's measuring, but really in the aggregate and in the context in which those measurements were taken, is something that we, in my opinion, really need to start building into curricula and everywhere. I mean, I would even say in elementary school, but anyway, these are just my musings in my career. All right, so let's talk about some examples of mitigations that have been created or put in place recently. So the EU has come up with and applied this general data protection regulation. So this is, of course, our legal mitigations. It's referred to as GDPR. Perhaps you've heard about this. It lays out very concrete definitions for consent in the data, in use of the data, data portability. So in effect, if you have your data at a certain company and you leave or you stop using the service, or you want to take it out of their repository and somewhere else where you might feel is more secure, you have agency to do that. Most folks don't even, like here in the US, we're trying to work on things like this, but we don't quite have stuff like this going on just yet. But that's an important thing to at least, concept at least, to sort of awaken in folks now, that say that you have some agency in where your data is held. And so therefore also in the security of your own data. Right to be forgotten, which is essentially saying, okay, if you delete your data, it is not just erased from like a public profile, but that is also erased in forever in the database of the business or institution keeping it. Breach notifications, now we definitely, of course, have those here. I don't know about anybody else in the call or in the present of the panelists, but I've gotten letters like that in the mail. There have been data breaches in banks and things like this. So those are really good. I mean, in general, what can we do with breach notifications? It just allows us one more degree of staying on top of, for example, our finances and seeing what's being done or what the movement is in our financials. And then also penalties, which is of course an important one. The penalties for the GDPR, at least last time I checked, I think 2019, 4% of revenue or 20 million euros. Now, depending on the size of this company, that may just be a slap on the wrist, but of course, these are ever evolving conversations. So this is very much like an EU mitigation. At least here in the US, what we have, which is becoming kind of like a template for the rest of the country and other states, is the California Consumer Privacy Act, so the CCPA. This applies to businesses that collect, sell personal information. You have a right to know how your data is being used and who it's being sold to. Right to delete, which is effectively the same thing as right to be forgotten. A right to opt out, which means you can say, okay, my data is only for this institution and nobody else. You can't use it with third-party or subsidiaries of the company. Non-discrimination for opt-out, of course, some measure in place that if you opt out, there aren't some sort of fines or service fees that get put on someone for doing that. And then penalties and fines, 7,500 per violation. Again, depending on the size of the company, this may be a slap on the wrist. But in any case, the kind of language that I was just using is really just beckoning to the fact that this needs to be an evolving conversation, and that these measures, at least in my opinion, need to be, I mean, it's hard to do one size fits all approaches in this domain, because certainly there'll be breaches and issues of misuse that are more egregious than, I mean, they're all egregious, but more dangerous than others. Let me see what's going on in the chat. This will all be buried somewhere in fine print. People will just check accept and sign up anyway. Yeah, I mean, that's a reality. But again, it at least needs to be a part of a transparent conversation. Very true. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, we all know the legal tactic of fine print and terms of conditions that are like 81 pages long. Who's going to read that? But therein, maybe there needs to be some discussion about privacy. How do I say? Regulation design. You know, maybe they have some sort of like summary up front. I mean, there's a million ways to go about this, but yeah, I take your point. Okay, so excuse me, pardon me, folks. It just rained, and well, it rained yesterday and the pollen is now picking up again. But these are just some of the mitigation strategies. Now, for the individuals, what might you do to ward against this? What might you do to protect yourself from these kinds of issues? There's really two things. It's let me see the chat. Oh, sorry. There's really two things. One is just to be a little bit more informed about how our data gets used. Now, you know, if you go sign up for a website and you have an account, just simply think about like what it is that your behavior on the website is, like what your behavior on that website is, how that might be being measured, and what kind of, you know, data that leads to. Now, anything you do on a platform is effectively, I mean, this is not hard and fast, but in a way is effectively getting measured somehow. So, you know, think about where you choose to place that security. And then on the other, it's also just to become active. I mean, activism in this domain is also really important. It's even more important now that this industry is growing at the pace that it is. You know, now, especially now, there are even more concerns with the advent of generative AI and things like this. But it's important to stay informed and to know what's going on. It's a little bit scary in certain regards, but you know, being informed, knowledge is power, and so being informed is important to help mitigate this and hold your representatives accountable for these kinds of regulations, or creating them at least. All right, my slide is not. Was that my last slide? I had other slides on here. Sorry, folks. Let me. Where is the? Oh, there we go. Oh, I don't know why it didn't. Anyway, this is really just a broad and quick overview of some of the things that have come up in this domain. By no means exhaustive, but if anybody has any questions, no matter how small, or you know, it could be about this stuff, the programming here at Flatiron, we'd be happy to answer them for you. Thanks for coming today, and may the force be with you. All right.
Thank you, JP. We'll see if my internet is sounding all froggy still, or is it okay?
Sounds pretty good to me.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. Does anybody have any questions this afternoon? We have Alyssa, like I said, we have Alyssa here from admissions. She's here to answer any questions that you may have, as well as anything about the presentation today. Any fun Star Wars stuff you want to talk about? Did you see the thing in the Q&A? It looks like, how can a credit reporting company that got hacked be able to turn around and charge its customers to monitor their credit for a fee? That service should be free. Something somebody's asking about.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I'm on the same page. I mean, personally, it seems kind of crazy that that would be something they charge you for, especially if you have some sort of risk. You know, again, keep being vocal to being vocal with companies is important because, you know, if folks aren't sort of having discussions out in the open, then really what we have is a problem, like in many other respects in society, is how we basically offload risk to other groups. I don't have a perfect answer for that. I would just say that I agree that it sucks that they would make that something that somebody has to pay for. But again, you know, it's just a business. It's everything's a business. They're going to turn security into this kind of thing.
Look, there's another one about why states don't adopt California's restrictions on data sharing or their data privacy laws.
Good. That's also a great question. States, given the structure of our republic, I mean, you know, the part of this issue is this, like, I mean, this is going to this arena again of you know, federal versus state, and a lot of states are different in their respects about how business gets done. And really, at the end of the day, this sort of these data questions about privacy and things like that can affect these things, can affect the flow of business. So it's kind of like a downer response, but I would imagine that that's the reason. But again, I'm not a policy person, but that would be my guess.
Looks like there's one more that just dropped in, talking about the survey results.
Yes, survey results are interesting in the very different point of view between what data services want and what customer wants, mainly because in the end, human beings who work in data services are also consumers. And reflect more conservative views on data sharing. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense to me. Whether they work in it or not, I think, again, now, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to get a feel of this, but I would imagine that folks are increasingly aware of breaches. Again, even before I started working in the industry, I remember getting letters in the mail about, you know, a breach happened. You know, make sure that you're checking your credit report and making sure that things aren't added to your credit report that you didn't, you know, in fact, create. So yeah, I mean, it affects everyone. I would even if you're I don't know, it's kind of hard to say, but even if you're, let's say, like a CEO of a company, it's going to affect you too. Like you know, it's really something. It's a soup that we're all in. So I would imagine, yeah, that, you know, it's of interest. Everybody would, in this respect, should be very concerned. All right, so we've got the Q&A panel, like the box, and
I think I got that. I grabbed that one.
okay.
I also dropped a link in there for to schedule a chat with admissions if anybody's interested, as well as a link to our events page and then our YouTube channel. That way, if you want to check out any previous events that we hosted, they will all be live there. Oh, looks like we got another one in the Q&A.
It's funny. I was like, I just made like a reminder in my calendar. I was like, I gotta sign up for that. Is the Facebook announcement of the case for data where they're offering a payback to anyone that had an account since 2012 to 2022. That's something you should make a claim as customers. Yes, I believe. Sorry, I see it says Alyssa. I don't know if you want to comment on it, but it says Alyssa is going to answer the question live. I don't know.
No, sorry, I just clicked it. That you're answering it live. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. But yeah, right. I think the spirit of that question is that the payback, or let's say the claim, or the settlement, whatever, is something that is available to folks who have had an account at Facebook between those years, so 2012 to 2022. So yeah, it only applies to the folks. It's not just everyone, but it would only apply to those Facebook users. Yeah. And folks, if you have any questions about data science, data analytics in general, I'm also happy to answer that. The kind of work that we do here at Flatiron, the kind of concepts that we teach, doesn't necessarily have to be about this topic. I'm more than happy to answer any question, no matter how small. Also, again, I apologize for the allergies. Great, this is great. Had me thinking a lot about data security. Thank you. Yeah, you're most welcome. Yeah, it's something that we should keep thinking about in this ever technological world. My pleasure. Most welcome. Most welcome.
What are
JP, I think there's one more. Yep,
Yeah.
in the Q&A. What is your favorite data analysis tool?
Favorite, I'll tell you what I use. I use, well, in analysis and machine learning, I use Python, which is a programming language. Most of my analysis is done in that. We often use this tool called Jupyter Notebook, which is this environment that you can easily code in and quickly visualize your data. That's really good. And then within Python, there's so many libraries, which are like, how do I say, like apps, if you can think of that, that help you visualize data and mess with it. Those are like Pandas, NumPy, Matplotlib. Let me see. Can you recommend any specific legislature apps for small businesses to consider for data safety? I'm not too familiar, nothing that's particular to small businesses. And that's, that's interesting because, one thing that I try to do is try to think about this deeply since I have some background, since I have a background in this industry, is how these things may differ, again, for small businesses versus larger businesses, because it's only natural to think that, excuse me, they're gonna like, sorry about that. It's only natural to think that smaller businesses have concerns that are particular to smaller businesses. Now, I'm sure there are things that issues that everybody cares about. Not everybody. Different size businesses, large or small, they all sort of have in common, but I would imagine there's particular ones for small businesses. Would you recommend ChatGPT for analysis, and what risk would be therein? Great question. Yes, well, is that alpha? Yeah. So ChatGPT is an incredible tool, but it's just that. My vote in the conversation now with ChatGPT, yes, it's changing a lot of it. It has the potential to revolutionize the way a lot of things are done across different industries. But I think that there is still something to say for the vetting of it, and also just like the human aspect of the ingenuity. Now, it does a great job with giving summary information, but it doesn't really have a great, how do I say, architecture for very specific things. Now, like you can ask it to write a research article, but is that research article on some topic going to be good? People have already done this, and it's not done well. So yes, it's doing a lot of great things in certain domains, but it's not like something that we should be, how do I say? It has room to grow is what I'm trying to say. For analysis, I'm not sure. I actually haven't done a lot in the way of using it to analyze data. Again, because analyzing data is something that needs interpretation. And the way interpretation is really the domain of a human being sitting in a chair, getting some data, understanding where that data's from, the greater context, the philosophy therein, and then, you know, connecting that to what the actual like diagrams are saying, and then communicating that. It needs this sort of like human aspect to it. So maybe not for analysis at all ends, maybe the coding, sure, because it can code, although it's not always perfect. Sometimes it'll code and you'll ask it, hey, give me a code to do something. And it's gotten it wrong before. And I'm talking about ChatGPT 4, the latest one. So it's got room for improvement, but I wouldn't consider it for like an entire analysis progression pipeline. Isn't it similar to AI that it needs? Yeah, that's a big question there. AI is a very big domain, and I think maybe what you're talking about is general intelligence. So when you have these conversations about artificial intelligence, there's artificial intelligence and then general intelligence. Now, I forget the actual term. General intelligence is if you have, let's say, a robot that can think and give you the impression that it is sentient and like, sentient and thinking being entity. And then there's, you know, there's the artificial intelligence that's really mostly machine learning. It's not all machine learning is a kind of intelligence that, excuse me, folks, sorry about that, is, how do I say this? Is not as dynamic. So when you are using machine learning algorithms, really what it's doing is that it's looking at a bunch of data and it's learning some either average behavior or some behavior of a particular like segment of the data. And that can be very powerful, but it's not the kind of intelligence that if you ask it a question on you know, philosophical implications of XYZ of something, that it'll be able to do that. Now, you can probably write a algorithm like ChatGPT that will think about it and will give you a good response, but there's nothing in that response, at least at the moment, that would get you to think that it's like having a cogent understanding of it. Really, what ChatGPT is doing in the background is looking at a database of documents, all web pages, a bunch of books. It turns them into text. It breaks up all the words in those documents and looks at the semantic relationships between all of the words, groups of words to other groups of words. And it's kind of like learning that. So it's learning kind of like an average semantic behavior. Again, that's average. Average isn't, it might give you a good, like that kind of thinking, it can give you a very good response superficially, even not so superficially, but there's a lot more that would be behind it really thinking about some new frontier, for example. You know, like it probably wouldn't be able to do that. Thanks, Kimberly. I appreciate that. All right.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I know that we're a little over time, but I appreciate you, JP, for taking the extra time to answer everyone's questions. And I'll be sending out some resources along with JP's slide deck. And if you have any other questions, we drop some links in here to schedule a chat. Also, feel free to connect with us through our website, flatironschool.com. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. May the 4th be with you.
Work with you, everyone. Thanks. Have a nice one.